The lives of A.T. Jones and E.J. Waggoner are complicated, as are all our lives. Two extremely bright, God-ordained men who for a decade or so were at the forefront of the work in the Seventh-day Adventist Church, both in the United States and abroad. They were both gifted and prolific writers and powerful speakers, used by God in an extraordinary way, who were looked up to by many in the church as being leaders with keen minds and articulate voices. Despite their huge contribution to the church and being, as Ellen White said repeatedly, the Lord's messengers, the closing years of their lives are complicated, nuanced, and sad. In 2 Corinthians 4 verse 7, the Bible, using symbolic language, says, "We have this treasure in earthen vessels." We are the earthen or faulty vessels, and the treasure is the message God has given to us to share with the world. Jones and Waggoner were entrusted with a beautiful message to share with the church and the world, which they faithfully did, yet they are not without their imperfections. Today we see the same sequence of events taking place. If someone does not like a particular message being given, if they cannot criticize the message, then the messenger will be in the firing line. When the message of righteousness by faith was given, some criticized the messengers because they did not present the message with all the grace and polish desirable. In 1892, Ellen White wrote to O.A. Olson in a letter, "I have seen how readily a word or action of Elder Jones or Elder Waggoner is criticized, how readily many minds overlook all the good that has been done through them in a few years past. They hunt for something to condemn, and their attitude toward these brethren who have zealously engaged in doing a good work shows that feelings of enmity and bitterness are in the heart." Each one of us has to give an account of our own spiritual life before God. Ellen White warned the church leaders who had so relentlessly criticized Jones and Waggoner to be careful how they expressed their differences. Their criticism and evil surmising was clearly not from the Holy Spirit. She would also state in 1892 that because of this relentless criticism, it was possible that Jones and Waggoner would be overcome by the temptations of the enemy, but this would not prove that the message they had did not come from God. And to believe that the message was not from God would be a fatal delusion. The persecution and opposition that they suffered had the potential to lead to their downfall, and if it did, the blame would to a large degree rest on those who had resisted the message. In the decade that followed 1888, Jones and Waggoner had many speaking opportunities, including at the General Conference, but there was a constant undermining of their work by certain brethren. Criticism from others is never easy to bear, especially when it comes from those in important positions who are deemed influential by the organization. Hearing that you are dangerous or hearing from others that you needed to be watched with suspicion cast is a heavy cross to bear that has the potential to lead one to stumble. Sadly, the stories of A.T. Jones and E.J. Waggoner would take a turn around the year 1900. Factors including the pantheistic influence of Dr. John Harvey Kellogg, marital problems with his wife, and the ongoing opposition from those in church leadership led E.J. Waggoner to leave the fellowship of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. He would sadly die at just the age of 61 in 1916 from a fatal heart attack. A.T. Jones, contrary to what some people may believe, was not against organization, but he would end up taking an unorthodox view of individual and corporate freedom, much of which came from John Harvey Kellogg's influence. In addition, the opposition that he received to the messages that he presented caused him to feel bitter and eventually to doubt the inspiration of the testimonies. Efforts were made to redeem him from the trajectory that he was on, particularly from Ellen White herself. She would write encouraging words to him in 1908, encouraging him to reread the messages that he and Waggoner had presented, which came from God, both for their own benefit and for the benefit of the wider church. In 1907, he had his ministerial credentials revoked, and in 1909, an emotional plea was made by A.G. Daniels, but he could not bring himself to respond. He was disfellowshipped in 1909, but continued to write for the next 14 years until his death in 1923. Prior to his death, he confessed to a colleague, "I have never given up the faith of the Seventh-day Adventist." And a nurse who looked after him prior to his death stated that he was a gentle and kind man who showed no signs of resentment. We leave their cases with the great judge. The story of Jones and Waggoner is of two men who were on fire for God, who were used mightily by him, and yet who later fell away. It should warn us that we be careful that while we're preaching to others, we are daily surrendering to Christ as well. We also see the role that criticism and persecution can play in someone else's downfall. And we need to be careful that we don't do this to other people and then use their eventual downfall as proof that they were wrong all along, when we may have had a huge part in causing it. May we learn the lessons for Jones and Waggoner and their detractors and not fall into the mistakes of either. The message of righteousness by faith that they had was undoubtedly from God. And may we allow that message to change our hearts and make us more like Jesus every day.